Welcome to session 3.3, so the last session of chapter 3. In this session, we are going to be talking about different positioning options for your elements and how to use relative and absolute positioning, along with doing a couple of other little formatting concepts. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is our positioning styles. When you style your elements, it's important that things look logical and sequential. Things look the way they're supposed to, and they're really nice to see, and they're good on the eye. A couple of different ways that we can do it. We can call them static, which is just how it's going to come by default, logically, sequentially. As you enter an element, the next element will fall after it. We can also use a relative position using those top, bottom, left, and rights to kind of nudge the item from its original position if they were static, up, down, left, right, a little further, one direction or another, just to add a little bit of relative positioning. If we wanted to move things around, if we wanted it 20 pixels in from the outside, we could add in a left 20 and do a relative positioning like that. We can also use absolute positioning, which also use the top, left, right, and bottom, but they set the exact location in pixels or percentages of your entire screen in relative to its parent object. So as opposed to being relative to the items around it, it's relative to its parent. So we can talk about how you can set your absolute positioning within your parent object to make sure something is always 20 pixels down from the screen rather than say a 20% or down from the parent. We can set a fixed location of the object regardless of the scrolling of the window. This sometimes is really useful for headers or footers. If you always want the header at the top and you don't want the user to have to scroll all the way up to the top, or the footer, you always want it at the bottom, you can have a fixed element position, and that will make it at a specific position on the screen, in the window, no matter where you wanted it. It's fixed. The last is inheriting, and you have to always remember that inheritance, that your objects and your elements are going to inherit their positioning from their parents. So if their parent has a fixed element positioning, so does every child. If they have it absolute, everything else below it. So you got to keep track of your positioning styles and make sure you understand. These values, by the way, can be either pixels or percentages, and we can play around with both of those. In this section, we're going to be playing with the PC Info HTML page. So first, we're going to come over here to the PC Info HTML page, and we are going to rename it. And make sure we scroll up to the top and put in our name and our date. Okay, first thing we're going to do is let's look at this page as it stands before we change anything. So let's just open it in our default browser and you'll see what it looks like. We're going to be playing a lot with absolute positioning on this page. So you can see we don't have any CSS at all because you can tell because we haven't done anything with our nav bar up here. But you can see we have a couple of pictures here with some text around them, and we're going to be absolutely positioning them. So they're going to be positioned into a specific spot. And we've already designed how we want that to look from our textbook. So if I bring this page over here and show you what it looks like, just to give you that visual from the textbook, this is what the page is going to be looking like. So we're going to be absolutely positioning all of our images and our text so that it will all fit in these exact spots. Right now it's not being positioned at all. So that's where we're going to be going with these images. Okay, so now that we have our PC Info page up, we're going to go ahead and add in our base CSS. We could copy and paste from one of our other HTML pages if we wanted to. So we could take this and copy it and paste as long as you recognize where the changes were going to be. So we're going to have a reset, and then instead of being styles 2, it's going to be styles 3, and instead of PC grids here, it's going to be PC Info. And it's kind of important to actually put them in the order that the textbook has given it, because there may be some styles that are already predefined in your styles 3 or in your reset, but you want the info one to be placed last So we're going to put it in that order. Next, we're going to be formatting our main element. So let's look at our code real quick and figure out where our main element is. So you can see we have our header, base header, all about chocolate. And then we have our main, and the main is an infographic, and it's this section here. And then we just have our footer all the way at the bottom. So when I save this and reset it, you'll see we get that standard background that we're used to. The all about chocolate across the top is the header. That's fine. And then our footer is also done, but everything kind of, I mean, all the images look really weird. So we have to format where all of those images are. Each of the images individually is being given a info1 with a class of an info box, and then which source is it? And then it has a paragraph underneath it. So that's what we're going to be playing with when it comes to changing our CSS. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to our PC Info CSS page, which will be this one. Let's rename it correctly so it actually pops up. And you'll see it's just boilerplate. That's just going to tell you about the main styles and then each of the different infographics and how we're going to be editing those. So make sure that's all good. Let's go down to our main styles and get started. So for our main section, we are going to be setting our position to be relative. Our main is going to be relative to everything else in the page. Our images are going to be absolute, but our main is going to be relative. Its height is going to be set static at 1400 pixels. So we want it at 1400 pixels. Even if the page is not 1400, it can add a scroll bar. In the case of the width, however, we want to put it at 100%. So we want it to stretch to the edges of the parent element that it's in, but we also want it to be a static height of 1400. So when I hit refresh, you can see the width didn't change much, but it did set this height here of this section to that 1400 pixels. All right, next down, we are going to do right after the main styles, we are going to be adding in, just before the main styles, pardon me, we're going to be adding in our info box with a display of none. And we're going to be doing this just so that things look okay while we're working through it. We can change this later. So anything that is an info box, we want its display to be none. You're going to look at me and go, but that literally should make all the images go away. It does. So we have a blank canvas to play with. This is what our 1400 looks like. This is our blank canvas. We'll be adding them back in as we go. Okay. We're going to come down into our infographic styles, and we are going to be setting our position of an info box to be an absolute. Remember, we just set our position of main to be relative. So it's important that our info boxes have a position of absolute so that we can format them to be in exactly the right spot. And then we're going to go to our first infographic, and we are going to say our div and then the name of info1, because remember that's what it was called. We're going to tell it it's a display block. Remember, you do absolutes with block. We're going to say its top is going to be hanging out at 20 pixels below the top of the parent that it's in, and its left is going to be 5% over. So if I'm looking at this page right here, here's the top. I want to be 20 pixels down, so like right about here, and 5% over. So the image should pop up right around in this section. And you'll see that's where the corner, the top corner of the image was going to end up. Now remember, our display up here set them to none. This display sets it back to block. So the rest of our info boxes don't show up, but that one shows in exactly the right position. And it's going to be static in that position because we set it as absolute. It's always going to be 20 pixels down and 5% of the width. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and add our next two boxes. So in this case, you're going to want to go and manually or think about how you want to design each of the different boxes if you were to do this yourself. Again, we're going to do a display block. And for the second graphic, we are going to make its top, where is it, from the top of its parent at 185 pixels. but we want its left-hand side to be 42% in. And the textbook manufacturer has already figured out 100, so this was 20 here, so 180 is going to be like here, and about 40% should be around in there. And you'll see, oh, sorry, 180 was a lot less than I thought it was. 180 is about here, and about 40%, so it looks like it's kind of in the middle. For our number 3, and we can kind of just copy and paste a little bit. So we're going to say for our infographic number 3, we want its display to be top or block. We want its top to be 135 so that it comes up just a little bit higher than where it was. And instead of being 42, we want its left to be 75%. So it's going to go up. See how it's up just a little bit because it's 135 instead of 180. And it's over at the 75% side. So we've kind of picked it up and moved it over there. We're going to go ahead and follow through with this with the rest of our infographics. So I'm going to stop talking, and then I'll speed it up so that it doesn't take too much time. So now you can see that all of our infographics have been added in. So we've added first, second, third. In this one, it was just text for our 4th, 5th, 6th. I think that's backwards. 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. So whether it's at 68, this is 7, and this is 8. Each one of them is in an absolute position. So as I said, if I increase the size of my text or my browser, to fill the entire space, they all kind of still look okay because they're all kind of in the right position, absolutely, for the text size that we are working on. The next thing we're going to cover is overflow. So a lot of times you're going to be adding a bunch of text to your page, or you're going to be adding lots of images to your page, and you need to be able to handle whether the scroll bars are going to show up or not. Sometimes you want them to, and sometimes you really don't. So you can control your overflow of what's going to happen when you have too much space or too much text. This happens a lot if you have a fixed height for your object and you want to set it as a fixed height as opposed to being able to have it as a scroll bar or have the entire content fill as you go along. So in that case, you can handle your overflow as being visible, showing everything on your overflow, all of your text. It's going to increase the height of your element as necessary. Overflow being hidden, being that there will be no overflow. Anything that doesn't fit on the box just doesn't show up. So there's nothing below it and there's no way to scroll. Overflow scroll will add horizontal and vertical scroll bars that will be added to the box or the element that you're working on, and you'll be able to move those scroll bars. If one of them is not necessary because the size of the text is big enough, the bar will still be there. There just won't be any way to scroll up or down. And then the last would be auto. If it's similar to the scroll, except if the scroll bar is not necessary because all of the text is showing, there just won't be any bar at all. Auto is a pretty common one. You only show the scroll bar when you need it. A little thing to remember with white space. If you don't want your text to wrap, you can tell it that for white spaces you want there to be no wrapping, and the text will continue to flow horizontally with a horizontal scroll bar. If you don't, it will wrap the text automatically and make the element longer. So that's the default would be to do that. But you can turn it all into one horizontal scroll by adding your white space as being no wrap. So when we want to set our overflow, overflow, as we just talked about, was going to be describing how the content puts in scroll bars. As you can see right now, I need to put in a scroll bar here because there's more content down below than there is on top. As I move things around, sometimes those scroll bars pop in and sometimes they don't, based on our minimum width and height for our page. What do you want to do with the overflow is something we're going to be writing in our main selector way back up at the top. So here we had our position relative, our height, our width. We're going to go ahead and add an overflow. And we are going to tell that overflow to be auto. What that's going to do is, as we talked about, the auto is going to be adding the scroll bars only when they're needed, as opposed to having them there all the time. Sometimes we have an image that we want to crop, but we don't want to crop the whole image. We want to crop it in CSS. So it only shows a section of the object, but we don't want to actually modify the image and go into an image editor to go change it in there. In this case, you can clip an object by specifying a rectangular shape around the object, or a circle shape, or an oval shape, an ellipse, given the top, bottom, left, and right, top, right, bottom, left, go clockwise from the top, to enter in the 4 elements that tell you how much to crop off of each side. So we can do 100, 270, 260, and 65, and it will crop up, over, down, and back up again. So that's how we can clip an object. The last one in this chapter is on stacking, and there is a concept in HTML that we call z-index. It's also pretty common in any type of photo editing, where you can have a z-index and you can stack things on top of each other. The z-index is going to tell you where do they fit in the stack, with the lowest number being the bottom of the stack and going up. So a z-index of 1 would be behind a z-index of 2, which would also be behind a z-index of 3, as you can see in the example here. Z-indexes only work with absolute positioning. So if you have relative positioning, Z-indexes are not going to work. You have to set your positioning to absolute for those. You also have to remember that nested objects exist in their parent. So the Z-index in the example here of a Z-index of 1 that has a nested Z-index of 4, that 4 is still going to be standing behind any Z-index of 2 because its parent is only at 1. So even though its index is larger, it doesn't mean anything. So z-indexes stay contained to their parent. If you have 3 objects that are in the parent, the 1, 2, and 3, those show up as expected. That z-index 4, it has a completely different parent, so it doesn't work exactly the same way. So those are your concepts for Chapter 3. In your review assignment, so remember, 3 projects, review assignment, case 1, case 4. In your review assignment, you are going to continue working with Pandasia chocolates, and you're going to build one more page, which is their March specials. The directions are all in the book. Remember to follow them in order as you go through them, or else some of the stuff is not going to make any sense. Your pages won't look right. So make sure you follow the directions. There will be a video on how to set up your website, and then we will talk about it during the team meeting of this week. If you missed that or whatever, please let me know, because you have this week to set up that website. If you have your website up, you're going to be pushing the entire assignment, the review assignment, to the website and making sure that you submit a link to the home page, or to the specials, in this case, the specials page, which is the part that's important for this. So the specials page in D2L. So in D2L, in the assignment, instead of uploading a file, you just have to upload the specials link to your website. If your site is not up, being that you started Chapter 3 before you got your site up, which is fine, this is your last week to be able to zip your folder and submit it in D2L. You're not going to be penalized this week if it is not up in your website. So you can still zip it the same way you did Chapters 1 and 2, submit them into D2L the same way that you did, and just remember that website has to be up by the end of this week. For our Case 2, we are going to be doing the slate and pencil tutoring page. Again, follow the directions very specifically, because they're going to be telling you what things to change in order. Really important that you follow the directions on this one. Again, if your website is up, go ahead and push the link, push the entire folder and submit a link to your SP homepage so that I can just click on that and go straight to your website. If it's not up yet, again, you can zip your folder and submit it to D2L. Our last project is our Park City Gazette. Remember, these are yours to play with. Do what you can to make it personalized and make it your own. The start page for this one is the PCG, Park City Gazette _front. That's going to be your first page. You're going to be renaming it. I think this one is included in the folder, so you should be fine, but make sure that you use the required elements. All of the stuff that is in there, the copy text and the images, I expect to see in the file that you give me. Yours is going to be completely different from anybody else's, but it should still have the same text and it should still have the same images, because we're going to use those same images throughout. Again, if you have your website up, submit a link. If you do not, go ahead and zip it and submit it to D2L. So make sure that you take your Chapter 3 quiz this week. Contact me if you have any trouble getting your website up and running. This is the last week that you can be zipping them. So as of next week with chapters 5 and 6, you're going to have your website up so that I can link to them. It's not going to be your whole midterm, but it is going to have to be in a location where I can access it via the internet rather than having you submit it to D2L. Make sure you check all of the requirements. You have to follow the directions exactly for 1 and 2, and then for the case 4, you're going to make sure you include all of the required elements. Most important part at this point when you get to case 4 is have fun. You should be enjoying the creativity process of building your site and making it personal. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon.